All right, so we are back with the Kerry Thornley files, part 8. We've got about 30 pages left in this particular file. Going to try to get through this today. All right, so this right here, we're continuing along the theme that Garrison knew Oswald was being impersonated by Kerry Thornley. He knew it. It was obvious because all of these various interactions with Oswald are now being placed inside the Kerry Thornley files, right, by Garrison himself. So I think it's pretty apparent that Garrison knew. So here what we have is we have an article marked Wilcox Exhibit 3002. And this is in reference to funds that Oswald allegedly received while he was in Dallas, but of course this isn't in the official story. So Western Union recalls sending message prior to assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald received small amounts of money via Western Union for several months prior to the assassination of President Kennedy. The Times Herald learned on Saturday. He sent a telegram himself printed in a curious, crowded script only a few days before the tragic afternoon. Oswald, what does that say? Oswald was remembered at Western Union. However, he invariably argued with those persons who assisted him. Okay, Jesus Christ. It's obviously Kerry Thornley. It's in the Kerry Thornley files. Garrison knew this was Kerry Thornley, not Oswald. But obviously Kerry Thornley was using the name of Oswald while he was in Dallas. It says the sender of the something of money ranging up to $10 or possibly $20 at a time was not known. Neither was the recipient of Oswald's message. Presumably, the FBI is investigating all messages involving both Oswald and his slayer, Jack Ruby, prior to the tragic weekend. Messages recalled. Oswald's messages at Western Union were recalled after he was shown on television. Again, a recurring theme. How many times have we seen this where it is after the assassination that a person remembers, oh, hey, that's the guy I interacted with, right? So, yes, this is another example of that. Obviously, this was Kerry Thornley, not Oswald. All right, so moving on. Now we're going to talk about Jack Martin slightly, but Jack Martin is not who we think he is. Thanks to Hank Borelli's work on Jack Martin, I think that it is pretty safe to say that Jack Martin at times was Edward Suggs and at times was Jean-Pierre Lafitte. So now we're going to talk about okay, so what does this look like? This looks like a U.S. Secret Service Treasury Department. So this is a Secret Service document from the New Orleans field office. Type of case, protective research. Investigation made at New Orleans, November 24th to 29th, 1963. Investigation made by Special Agent Anthony Garretts and Special Agent in Charge John W. Rice. Title or caption: Lee Harvey Oswald, assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Synopsis: investigation disclosed that information furnished by Jack S. Martin to the effect that David William Ferry associated with Lee Harvey Oswald at New Orleans and trained Oswald in the use of a rifle with a telescopic lens. Also that Ferry had visited Dallas several weeks prior to the assassination of President John Kennedy is without foundation. Jack S. Martin, who has the appearance of being an alcoholic, has the reputation locally of furnishing incorrect information to law enforcement officers, attorneys, etc. Details of investigation. At 5 p.m. on 11/24/63. Donald Mitchell, 1501 and a half, General Taylor Street, New Orleans, rear basement apartment, called at the office and was interviewed by a reporting agent. Mr. Mitchell stated that he shares this apartment with one J. Philip Stein, a.k.a. Jerry. Mr. Mitchell advised also that the telephone in this apartment is in the name of Herman S. Coleman, Assistant District Attorney, Parish of Orleans, New Orleans, Louisiana, for the reason that Mr. Coleman formerly shared the apartment with J. Philip Stein, but that Coleman recently married and moved from the apartment. The telephone number in question is Twinbrook 1-8703. Time during the afternoon of Sunday, 11/24/63, Jerry Stein answered the telephone in their apartment. Now, the person calling was endeavoring to contact Herman S. Coleman, explaining to Stein that the reason he was trying to get in touch with Coleman was that Coleman had written a story about an individual known as Ferry, and that Ferry was a hypnotist, and he'd either taught or had something to do with Oswald being taught how to use rifles with telescopic lenses. Also indicating that Ferry had collection of rifles. The caller also informed Stein that Ferry had been in Dallas about 2 weeks prior to 11/24/63, and that Ferry had been corresponding with Oswald. According to Mr. Mitchell, the person making this telephone call said his name was Jack, no last name given. Subsequent to the interview with Donald Mitchell, several attempts were made to contact Herman S. Coleman. At 11 p.m. on 11/24/63, a telephone call was received from J. Philip Stein. He said he did not know Jack's last name. He said that the FBI had been investigating Ferry several weeks prior to 11/24/63, and that Ferry is said to be an airplane pilot and allegedly has flown supplies to Cuba. Stein stated that Jack told him that Ferry was said to have been in Dallas several weeks previously. Further, that Ferry is allegedly a homosexual. Stein stated that he was told by Jack that Ferry had been training some Civil Air Patrol boys in the use of foreign-made arms and allegedly trained Oswald in the use of a rifle. Stein stated that Ferry is said to be rather intelligent, that he allegedly has a Ph.D. degree and is a hypnotist. He said that Herman S. Coleman, a former newspaper reporter, had written a story about Ferry about 2 years ago, and that the story had appeared in the Times-Picayune, a New Orleans morning newspaper. Stein stated that according to Jack, Ferry is alleged to have been communicating with Oswald, that both were allegedly engaged in the same type of work. He said that Ferry was believed to be living in the Louisiana Avenue Parkway area, New Orleans. At 11:10 p.m. on 11/24/63, reporting agent received a telephone call from Herman S. Coleman. He said that he was an assistant district attorney for the parish of Orleans and that he was calling from the district attorney's office. It was apparent that Mr. Coleman was reluctant to talk about Ferry. He finally stated, however, the district attorney's office was conducting an investigation on their own with regard to Ferry, and that Ferry is actually David Ferry, white male, 42, 195, 5'11", wears a wig, having suffered loss of hair in blotches. He said that Ferry has a record at the New Orleans Police Department, Bureau of Identification. that he had been arrested several times and charged with moral offenses involving young boys. He said that Ferry, at one time, lived on Atheron Drive in Metairie, Louisiana, a suburb of New Orleans. Mr. Coleman stated that at the time of his telephone conversation with me, his office had 10 police officers, investigators for the district attorney's office, scouring the city for David Ferry, and in the event Ferry was picked up, he would notify me. No request was made of Mr. Coleman that Ferry be picked up and held for this service. At 12:35 a.m. on 11/25/63. That is the Monday after the assassination in the morning. At 12:35 a.m. 11/25/63, Assistant District Attorney Herman S. Coleman telephoned the reporting agent at his residence, at which time he advised that he had received information to the effect that David William Ferry had left for Dallas on Friday 11/22/63 during the afternoon, traveling in a light blue Comet. He also advised that Ferry reportedly had a plane and may still have it. He said that at the time of his telephone conversation with me, Ferry was allegedly on his way back to New Orleans. Mr. Coleman stated that it was his information that Harvey Lee Oswald was in Ferry's Civil Air Patrol group in New Orleans some years ago, that Ferry allegedly had a fraudulent charter, and that the Civil Aeronautics Board checked on it. When pressed for the full name of the informant, thus far referred to only as Jack, Mr. Coleman stated that he was, quote, just a fellow who worked around the police headquarters building, and that Jack did not want to become involved in this investigation. For that reason, he did not want his name mentioned in any way. Mr. Coleman was informed that Jack would have to be interviewed in person by representatives of this service. During the late afternoon of 11/25/63, Special Agent in Charge Rice received a telephone call from Herman S. Coleman advising that David Ferry had been picked up by representatives of the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, and that he was being questioned in the District Attorney's Office at that time. Mr. Coleman informed Special Agent in Charge Rice that Ferry would shortly be brought to the 1st District Police Station where he would be booked. At approximately 7 p.m. on 11/25/63, Special Agent in Charge Rice and reporting agent interviewed David William Ferry, white male, 46, date of birth 3/18/18, at Cleveland, Ohio. 5'11", 190, ruddy complexion, brown eyes, wears dark brown kinky wig with a reddish tint, false upper teeth. Resides at 3330 Louisiana Avenue Parkway, New Orleans. Former address 331 Atherton Drive in Metairie, Louisiana. Ferry stated that he had lived at 17302 Laverne and at 6801 Pear Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. David William Ferry stated that when he was employed by Eastern Airlines, he flew mostly to Houston, San Antonio, Corpus Christi, and Brownsville, and various intermediate points that he sometimes flew to New York via Atlanta and Washington. Ferry insisted that he was in New Orleans on Thursday, November 21st, 1963, and on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, until about 9 p.m. He said that he is positive that he was in New Orleans on the dates mentioned because he had been in court in connection with a trial involving Carlos Marcello. That is false. He stated that he departed New Orleans about 9 p.m. on 11/22/63 and drove to Houston and Galveston, Texas with two companions, Alvin Beaubouf, about 19 or 20 years old, of 2427 Alvar Street, New Orleans, and Melvin Coffey, about 26 to 28 years old, 618 North Pierce Street, New Orleans. That he was driving a 1961 Blue Comet four-door station wagon with 1963 Louisiana license, having bought the car from Delta Mercury, Inc., 2201 Canal Street, New Orleans, about 3 or 4 weeks previously. Charles Graham was the salesman. So if you didn't know, Ferry was in Dallas, and Melvin Coffey is an alias used by Leighton Martins. So those three guys went to fucking Dallas together. They flew into Dallas in Ferry's plane. Ferry stated that he and his two companions mentioned above returned to New Orleans about 9:30 p.m. on 11/24/63, and then he telephoned attorney G. Ray Gill, by whom he is employed as an investigator. several times. That at Gill's suggestion, he left New Orleans about midnight that same date and drove to Hammond, Louisiana, where he stayed at the Holloway Smith Hall on Sycamore Street at the Southeastern Louisiana College, where he has a friend, Thomas Compton, who does research in narcotics addiction under a Dr. Nichols under a federal grant. He said he left Hammond about 1 p.m. on 11/25/63 and arrived in New Orleans about 3 p.m. Then immediately upon arriving at New Orleans, he contacted Attorney Gill, who accompanied him to the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, where he was wanted for questioning in connection with the Oswald case. I think later on this week we'll start on the David Ferry file, and I will go into the details of what David Ferry actually did. Once we go over the documents related to the Galveston trip, you will see that he never went on that fucking trip, or not the way that the story tells us, right? So, and from that, we'll get into the Winterland Ice Arena, which is like the fucking entire linchpin, crux, fucking central axis of, center of the spider's web, however you want to call it. The Winterland Ice Arena is like the fucking holy shit explosive revelations that I had in reference to the assassination that subsequently led to me filling in the rest of the gaps, right? So we'll get to all that when we get to David Ferry's file, but know all the stuff that he's saying about going on this trip with Melvin Coffey and all these this is all nonsense, right? So he was in Dallas 2 days before the assassination. He was one of 2 shooters on the grassy knoll. He then is a shooter of J.D. Tippit, and then he ends up fleeing to Hammond, Louisiana the night of the assassination, where he stays with Thomas Compton and stays in motherfucking Hammond all weekend, with the exception of one trip to Galveston to check into the hotel for Sergio Arcacha and the 2 boys who ended up going to the Winterland, because David Ferry didn't go to the Winterland. But we'll get to that. During the interview with Ferry by Special Agent in Charge Rice and myself, he stated that he had left New Orleans on 10/11/63 via Taka Airlines. That's like Taka Airlines. Isn't that like the cocaine airlines? Taka Airlines for Guatemala, and had returned via the same line, arriving in New Orleans on 10/18/63. He stated that he again left New Orleans on 10/30/63 via Taka Airlines for Guatemala, returning via the same route, arriving in New Orleans on 11/1/63. Ferry indicated that he had made these trips to Guatemala for Attorney G. Ray Gill, and that the trips involved some investigative work having to do with the Carlos Marcello case. David William Ferry emphatically denied that he had been in Dallas for about the last 8 to 10 years. As the interview with David William Ferry was about to end, he stated that he had a very good idea who had reported him as having associated with Oswald, training him in the use of rifles with telescopic lenses, etc., that he was firmly convinced that one Jack S. Martin, who resides at the corner of Esplanade Avenue and North, looks like Pryor Street, had made this false report concerning him. He stated that Martin makes a practice of hanging around the offices of various attorneys, courtrooms, etc., and is well known locally for furnishing false leads to law enforcement officers, attorneys, etc. Subsequent to our interview at Ferry on the night of 11/25/63, he was interviewed by FBI agents at the 1st District Police Station. On 11/26/63, it was learned the FBI agents had talked with Jack S. Martin, who admitted that he had been the informant with regard to David William Ferry. That Martin had admitted to FBI agents that the information which he had furnished Assistant District Attorney Coleman was a figment of his imagination, and that he had made the story up after reading the newspapers and watching television. That he remembered that Coleman, a former newspaper reporter, had written an article or story about Ferry a couple years ago, and that he pieced the whole thing together in his mind, and he had given it to Coleman as facts. On the night of 11/29/63, Special Agent in Charge Rice and reporting agent interviewed Jack S. Martin at length in his small rundown apartment located at 1311 North Pryor Street, New Orleans, which he shared with his wife and 6-year-old son. Martin, who has every appearance of being an alcoholic, admitted during the interview that he suffers from telephonitis when drinking, And it was during one of his drinking sprees that he telephoned Assistant District Attorney Herman S. Coleman and told him this fantastic story about William David Ferry being involved with Lee Harvey Oswald. He said he had heard on television that Oswald had been one time active in the Civil Air Patrol and later heard Ferry had been his squadron commander. Martin stated that Ferry was well known to him, that he recalled having seen rifles in Ferry's home, and also recalled that Coleman had written an article on Ferry and that Ferry had been a Marine and had been with the Civil Air Patrol. Martin stated that after turning all those thoughts over in his mind, he telephoned Herman S. Coleman and told his story as though it was based on facts rather than his imagination. I don't believe not a single word of that, and I don't believe the Jack Martin that they're talking to, Edward Suggs, is the Jack Martin who made that fucking phone call. Because the guy who made that phone call, that I'm convinced is Jean-Pierre Lafitte, was a professional informant. That's what he fucking did. He worked with the FBI, the CIA, you name it. When you look into the history of Jean-Pierre Lafitte, that's what he did. He was a professional rat. Al Borelli's work on Jean-Pierre Lafitte and the aliases with Jack Martin, comparing it to the work of Joan Mellon, was phenomenal. Everybody should pick that up. That was in, I don't remember if it was High Strangeness or in Coup in Dallas, but you should read all of Al Borelli's books. They're one of the only fucking Kennedy researchers I respect. Okay, where was I? In view of the above, this phase of the investigation involving William David Ferry will be considered closed. Undeveloped leads. Case remains open at New Orleans pending submission of several additional reports covering investigation thus far conducted, after which the case will be closed here and investigation discontinued in accordance with Chief's instructions. FBI report, November 27, 1963, David Pierce Magyar, Chief Pilot, Trans-Gulf Seaplane Service, Inc., New Orleans, Louisiana, advised that he obtained a visitor's visa to travel to Mexico about September 17, 1963. So David Magyar was a friend of David Ferry, and the reason that this is significant is because his trip and his going to get a visa to go to Mexico for his job somewhat corresponded with the dates that Oswald was allegedly in Mexico City, right? Give or take a couple days, right? Oswald allegedly crossed into Mexico City on September 26th in the middle of the night. And here we have Magyar, who was a friend of David Ferry's, having gotten the... this is the funny thing. He got the visa the same date that Oswald allegedly got his visa, September 17th. But then Magyar flies to Mexico September 24th, returns September 30th, which is kind of funny because there's some obfuscation. Well, obviously, fucking Oswald never went to Mexico City. It was Kerry Thornley, and Kerry Thornley had been there a couple times during that month. We have proof that he was there in August, and it was clearly him there in fucking September, right? So this is in the Kerry Thornley files. So obviously, we have... Oh, man, I can't believe I didn't even put this together till now, even though I already wrote about this part in a section of my book. So obviously, what is going on here is that Garrison is thinking that David Pierce Magyar was the person who flew Kerry Thornley to fucking Mexico City, and holy shit, he probably was, now that I'm thinking about it. I don't know why I didn't put two and two together on this earlier. But yes, that is probably what he's thinking. David Pierce Magyar flew, but see, he didn't fly him back. I'll tell you that much. It's weird though, because Oswald's visa is stamped to return September 30th, the same day that fucking David Pierce Magyar's visa and his flight are dated September 30th, right? So there's some weird obfuscation going on there. Weird coincidence also, but it would make perfect sense to me if Magyar was the pilot who flew Kerry Thornley to Mexico City. Damn, that makes a lot of sense. He advised he departed New Orleans by a seaplane on September 24th, returned September 30th. He was hired by the Williams McWilliams Dredging Company of New Orleans to fly 2 employees to a point about 60 to 70 air miles south of Tampico, Mexico. See, the weird thing about the Williams McWilliams Dredging Company is that you'll find that George de Mohrenschildt had some employment by the Williams McWilliams Dredging Company. So weird coincidence there. Who knows? if there's anything significant. He advised that the employees of the Williams firm were Carl Hackenos and Carl Shearer, phonetic. He stated that they passed through American customs at Brownsville, Texas, and ongoing to and returning from Mexico. He stated that the McWilliams firm was hired by the Mexican government to conduct an aerial survey in regards to the dredging a canal in Mexico. Magyar viewed a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald and advised he does not personally know Oswald, and other than viewing him on television and reading about him in the newspapers, he does not know anything else about him. Magyar advised that he was personally acquainted with Captain David Ferry, but that his relationship was very casual, as he did not consider Ferry to be a close personal friend. He advised that Ferry was a former Eastern Airlines pilot who about 10 years ago was in charge of the Civil Air Patrol unit, which held meetings at Moisant Airport. He recalls that Ferry seemed to be able to handle young boys very well, but does not know whether Lee Harvey Oswald was a member of the Civil Air Patrol at that time. He advised that George Piazza, 539 Henry Clay Avenue, was one of Captain David Ferry's best friends and would probably be able to furnish any pertinent information regarding Ferry that was needed. Magyar was under the impression that Piazza was a former member of the Civil Air Patrol and probably a member at the same time Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly was a member. So yeah, stuff with Magyar is interesting. There's a photograph of Magyar and David Ferry in front of Magyar's plane. I forget the date it was taken. It was in this range, 61 to 63 sometime. But again, you have people who have a relationship with David Ferry downplaying the relationship, right? He also advised that a Leon Guidry, phonetic, presently residing in New Orleans, exact address unknown, was in the Civil Air Patrol at the same time as Captain David Ferry. From what he could recall, Guidry was cadet captain in the Civil Air Patrol in charge of all cadets and would probably recall other members of the Civil Air Patrol. Magyar stated that in regards to his applying for his tourist visa at the Mexican consul in New Orleans, that he personally contacted the consul office in September of 63 but could not recall the exact date. He stated that no one was in the consul office during the time that he was there except the white female clerk who issued the tourist visa to him. Stated that it was about 2:30 p.m. when he was in the consul's office to apply for his visa, and nobody entered the office while he was there. So, okay, so we have a lot of coincidences going on here, right? So Magyar, as per the investigation by Garrison, determined that Magyar got his fucking Mexican visa the same date that Oswald did, right? So he's, of course, reading between the lines, Garrison is thinking that this is Kerry Thornley, right? This is in the Kerry Thornley fucking file. So yeah, Garrison was thinking that Magyar was the pilot who flew Kerry Thornley to Mexico City on September the 24th, which is funny because Oswald isn't supposed to have gone into Mexico City till the 26th, but I can prove that Oswald was still in fucking New Orleans on the 26th, right? So the 26th is so important because I can put at the exact same time, September 26th, within a couple hours of each other, I can put Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans closing out his P.O. box and leaving a forwarding address. I can put William Seymour at Sylvia fucking Odio's house with Lauren Hall and Lawrence Howard, where she identifies Leon Oswald, right? And then I can fucking say with certainty that it was Kerry Thornley in Mexico City on September 26th, when Oswald's visa is stamped as he goes into Mexico City. But here's the thing. If he got a flight in with David Magyar, that means that he had to have somebody else stamp the visa, right? Which means more fake IDs, which could correspond with the signatures of the check-in at the hotel, the Commercial, whatever it was called, I forget, that had Lee, comma, Harvey Oswald, right? So they put the comma in the wrong fucking place when they put the name out there. So, yeah, this whole Mexico City trip is starting to come together, and yeah, but there's too many coincidences is what I was saying. So the coincidences are that Magyar got his visa the same day that Kerry Thornley did, aka Oswald, right? And also the other part of the coincidence is that he returned on September 30th, which is the same date that Oswald's fucking visa was stamped as having returned. Even though officially they say that Oswald didn't fucking come back until October 4th. But on October 4th, I have an Oswald sighting in Alice, Texas with Marina and a child, where Oswald allegedly tries to get a job at a radio station, right? But no, that radio station was obviously some kind of cover. I have a feeling if you were to pull the phone records of that radio station, you'd see that Kerry Thornley was calling another radio station from there, probably WSHO in New Orleans. So, but we'll get into that another time when we get to Hank Greenspun eventually. All right, so David Peters Magyar, chief pilot, Transgulf Seaplane Service, Inc., New Orleans, Louisiana, advised that he obtained a visitor's visa to travel to Mexico about September 17th. He advised he departed New Orleans September 24th and returned September 30th. Yeah. Too much coincidence surrounding Magyar and the trips and the dates surrounding Oswald's trip to Mexico City. Yeah, so I think the reality is fucking Magyar, who was way closer to David Ferry than he admits in his interviews, flew Kerry Thornley there on the 24th. But then how the fuck now I got to figure out how it was probably, there's some shenanigans with the bus and who was on the bus, who went to Mexico City on the bus, who was probably on the bus just getting Oswald's passport fucking stamped. Ugh. Ridiculous. Frederick O'Sullivan. Okay, this is an interesting guy. Mossad. Straight up Mossad. Frederick O'Sullivan, Detective Intelligence Unit, Vice Squad, New Orleans Police Department, furnished the following statement. O'Sullivan advised that in connection with Lee Harvey Oswald investigation being conducted by the FBI, that he had obtained information that Robert, last name unknown, 1012 Dauphine Street, had recently moved here to New Orleans from Dallas, Texas. Robert allegedly had made statements to the effect that he was glad President Kennedy had been shot, and that either prior to at the time of the assassination, he allegedly made a short visit back to Dallas. O'Sullivan advised that Robert is an admitted homosexual and is presently employed in an unknown bank in New Orleans. He is described as a white male, 29, 5'10", 140, blonde crew cut, and driving a 1962 silver blue Oldsmobile. O'Sullivan further advised that about 6 or 8 weeks ago, he saw an individual in the French Quarter strongly resembling Ruby, the murder of President Kennedy's assassin. O'Sullivan advised that from pictures of Ruby he had seen in the newspaper, he felt fairly certain that he had seen Ruby in the French Quarter in the company of a Frank Carracci, owner of the 500 Club, Bourbon Street. Also present was Nick Carano, partner of Frank Carracci. I got to check this name out real quick because this is Frederick O'Sullivan. Okay, great. Yeah, I found it. So here we go. Let me put this over here and let me switch this up. There we go. So to Ephraim O'Sullivan, let me see if I can get the headline here. How Oswald's childhood friend found himself in Israel and ended up helping the Mossad. Okay. So let's go scroll down just a little bit. To Ephraim O'Sullivan, Lee Harvey Oswald was always Lee, even after he assassinated President John F. Kennedy. Yo, fuck off. Lee was the kid who lived down the street from him in a working-class neighborhood of New Orleans. The classmate who always sat next to him in alphabetical order in junior high homeroom. Ephraim, back then still known as Fred, remembered Lee as a loner, a kid he unsuccessfully tried to recruit in high school to the drill team of the Civil Air Patrol, as he would later testify to the Warren Commission that investigated Kennedy's assassination. Okay? So, yeah, this is Fred O'Sullivan, Oswald's childhood friend who tried to get him into the Civil Air Patrol. And let's go back to the fucking Thornley document. Frederick O'Sullivan, Detective Intelligence Unit. Okay? It's the same fucking guy. Same fucking guy. Same fucking guy. Let's see if anywhere in this statement it mentions that Frederick O'Sullivan was fucking friends with goddamn Lee Harvey Oswald when he was growing up. Frank Carracci, co-owner of Club 500 Bourbon Street, advised that he never met Jacqueline Ruby, I'm sure, but was aware that the fact that Ruby was in New Orleans looking for dancers in about June 63, at about the time that Jeanette Conforto was completing her engagement at the Show Bar Club on Bourbon Street. Remember yesterday, we talked about Janet Conforto getting in the crash in front of Texas Instruments in Dallas on November 22nd, 10:30 in the morning, on her way back to fucking New Orleans, right? Karachi recalled it one night, probably in June. He and Nick Carano, his partner, were in his office when his night manager, Cleve Dugas, came into the office and said there was a man who ran the Carousel Club in Dallas out front who wanted to talk to Karachi about hiring some dancers. He told Dugas to tell this man that he knew of no dancers available other than Conforto. He told Dugas to tell this person to go to the show bar and talk to Conforto. Karachi stated that neither he nor Carno met this individual, and then he concluded that this individual actually was Ruby since he had read the newspapers and heard on television that Ruby operated the Carousel Club. Karachi said he did not know Lee Harvey Oswald, never heard of him before the assassination of the president. Yeah, so we just had a fucking statement from Lee O'Sullivan, or Frederick O'Sullivan, who ends up in Israel later in life, becomes a fucking Mossad operative. Let me see. Oh, he's a Catholic who grew up not knowing any Jews, and he converted to Judaism in 1967, caught the Zionist bug, and moved his family to Israel like a good trader. See, people like this should just be fucking thrown in prison for the rest of their fucking lives. Period. So yeah, he knew Oswald. He went to school with fucking Oswald, and then we have him here not even mentioning that he knows Oswald, but it's included in the Kerry Thornley files. Curious as fuck, wouldn't you say? All right, what's this? Number T-2, that's an informant number, informed that Mexican tourist card number 24085, good for 15 days travel in Mexico from the date of issuance, was issued on September 17th, 1963. Lee Harvey Oswald of 4907 Magazine Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. This application reflected Oswald was 23 years of age, married, a photographer by profession, really, and allegedly employed at 640 Rampart Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. He showed proof of American citizenship by presenting a birth certificate and claimed to be taking $300 to Mexico as an in-transit tourist for a period of 15 days, that his travel would be via bus. Number T2 stated that the in-transit tourist travel means that the traveler, namely Oswald, intended to travel out of Mexico to some other country. However, his records did not reflect to what locale Oswald would travel. He stated 2 copies of the tourist card are issued. One would be picked up by Mexican immigration authorities at Oswald's point of entry into Mexico, and the second copy would be picked up at the time he left Mexico. He suggested that if Oswald traveled by bus, as indicated in his application, he would have entered Mexico, probably at Laredo or Roma on the Mexican border. He stated there is no return made to the New Orleans Mexican consulate concerning this issued tourist card, but that the tourist card is returned finally to Mexican immigration authorities, namely Secretaría de Gobernación, Calle Bucareli number 99, Mexico, DF, Mexico. He stated these records would show if Oswald traveled to some other country after arriving in Mexico. In addition to the 15-day tourist cards issued by the Mexican consulate, there are 6-month tourist cards issued, which cards would be used within 90 days from the date of issuance, but which are valid for a period of 6 months in Mexico from the date of entry. These tourist cards are issued for $3. Both the 15-day tourist card applications and the 6-month tourist card applications were reviewed, and they failed to show any references to Heidel, Ruby, or Rubenstein. In addition to the tourist card issued to Oswald on September 17th, there were 9 additional 15-day tourist cards issued, and there were 9 additional 6-month tourist cards issued. Okay, so let me discuss this just a little bit, because this is what the fuck happened. Kerry Thornley was obviously the person who went and got a tourist visa. Now, here's where the problem really lies. Oswald did not apply for a fucking 15-day visa. Oswald applied for a 6-month visa. Okay, when you go into look at his application, it is clearly a 6-month visa. As it was as mentioned here, there's 2 different types: the 15-day and the 6-month. Now, if he had been rejected for the 6-month that he applied for, there would be documents showing that he was rejected, and he would have to reapply with the correct application. There was a separate application. This is all covered in my book. There's a separate application for the 15-day visa, which doesn't fucking exist ever. So allegedly, we're supposed to believe that he turned in a 6-month visa and yet was issued a 15-day visa with no additional paperwork stuffed in the middle there. It's fucking ridiculous. Remember, this consulate ends up getting relocated to the CIA-run Trade Mart. All right, moving on. Manuel Gill, Employee Information Council of the Americas, otherwise known as INCA. 620 Gravier Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, advised that he did not know Lee Harvey Oswald personally, could not say whether he had ever personally conversed either in person or by telephone with Oswald. Gill stated he had become aware of Oswald in approximately August of 1963, at which time Oswald had been arrested by the New Orleans Police Department in connection with the passing out of leaflets by Oswald and a fight which had developed between Oswald and other individuals at that time. That's going to be on August 9th with Carlos Bernier. Gill stated subsequent to the arrest of Oswald, the Information Council of the Americas, Inc., had prepared a tape of a debate or interview between Oswald Edward Butler, staff director of the Information Council of the Americas, Inc., and other individuals. Gill stated the tape, which they had prepared for dissemination use in Central American countries, and the debate or interview had actually occurred on a radio program, New Orleans Radio WDSU. Gill stated there was a time when he thought an individual had made numerous telephone calls to him was Oswald. At that time, he had related his suspicions that the person who had made the telephone calls to him was Oswald to Mr. Edward Butler. Gill explained that the reason he had felt that the person making the telephone calls was Oswald was simply on the basis of the voice of Oswald, which he had heard at the time of the interview sounded very similar to the voice of the individual who had made the telephone calls to him previously. Gill stated the person making the telephone calls to him had a first name of Steve, but he could not recall what the last name had been. Gill advised that Steve had first started making telephone calls to him approximately November or December 1961 and continued to make telephone calls until approximately January 1962. Gill stated he considered Steve to be a crackpot, but Steve had called him so many times requesting that he, Steve, be put in touch with the head of the Cuban resistance group that he, Gill, had finally referred Steve to Sergio Arcacha, who was the head of the anti-Castro Cuban organization in New Orleans, Louisiana. Gill stated that he had referred Steve to Arcacha merely as a means of getting rid of Steve's nuisance calls. Gill advised that Steve had related Steve's plans to free Cuba was simply that Steve wanted an organization to drop him into Cuba and that he, Steve, would kill Castro by means of a rifle with a telescopic sight. Gill pointed out that since seeing the recent newspaper publicity concerning Lee Harvey Oswald, which indicated Oswald had been in Russia during the period of the telephone calls from Steve, Gill had changed his mind as to the source of the calls, but prior to that had been of the opinion that they were probably from Lee Harvey Oswald. Gill stated he was sure that Sergio Arcacha, who he, Gill, understood was presently in Houston, Texas, had interviewed Steve, and Arcacha would probably have additional information on Steve. Gill stated he seemed to recall that Steve had furnished him a telephone number which was at the New Orleans Greyhound Line's terminal, and he recalled having reached Steve through this number on at least one occasion. Gill advised that he did not necessarily believe that Steve was an employee at the New Orleans Greyhound Terminal, but Steve just seemed to hang around the area of the telephone number furnished. Gill advised it was possible that he had Stephen's telephone number and last name among numerous papers which he, Gill, had at his home on completion of his appointments for the day, would check the papers at his home and advise the New Orleans office of any additional information he could determine. Interesting. Mr. Joseph B. Toner, manager, New Orleans Retailers Credit Bureau, Inc., Masonic Temple Building. Don't see too many of those anymore, right? Masonic Temple Building. Yeah, let's just fucking call it the Church of Satan, why don't we? Advised that Mr. J.D. Vinson of the Isaac Detective Agency, room 608, Richards Building, New Orleans, had come to the Credit Bureau on November 27, 1963, and requested that the following names be checked through the files: Lee Harvey Oswald, wife Marina, Robert Lee Oswald, A.J. Heidel, Post Office Box 30016. Forrest E. La Violeta, Leonard Reisman, Carlos Bernier. Mr. Toner stated that he told Mr. Vinson that his inquiry regarding Oswald would be reported to the New Orleans FBI office. Here we go. Alice, Texas. All right. November 25th, 1963, Layman L. Stewart, General Manager and Vice President of radio station KOPY, Alice, Texas, advised that he recognized the photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald as being identical to an individual who stopped at the radio station located on Highway 281 in Dallas, Texas, at about 2 or 3 p.m. on either Friday, September 28th, 1963, or Friday, October 4th, 1963. This individual was driving an old model 1953 or 1954 car, possibly a Chevy sedan. He mentioned he had just come from Mexico. Crucially important stuff here, people. It was October 4th. It was not September 28th. This was determined later on when Garrison narrowed down the dates. This is clearly Kerry Thornley driving back from Mexico, where I don't know how he got from Mexico City to the border, but obviously from the border, he then has a car waiting for him. This 1953 or 54 car, possibly a Chevy sedan, sounds like Ruth Payne's car, doesn't it? This individual made no previous appointment, had no previous communication with the radio station. He inquired as to a job as radio announcer, but no such job was available and no background information was taken from him. Stewart stated this individual was unshaven, not Oswald. Wore blue jeans and possibly a sweatshirt. He mentioned that his wife, who remained in the automobile, could speak no English. It was noted that there was a 2-year-old child in the front seat of the car with him. Okay. Do you see what I see? Obviously, this is not Oswald. October 4th, where the fuck is Oswald? Well, on October 4th, we have this incident here in Alice, Texas. We also have the incident with Larry Crawford at the Texas Employment Commission, where he's giving the name Oswald to Laura Cottrell, right? So there's a lot going on October 4th. Also, there is some, I don't know what to call it, rumor, speculation, scuttlebutt, that Oswald had been seen at the book depository on October 4th. But he didn't even put in his job application there till October 15th. So there's some obfuscation there I'm going to have to one day figure out. But, yeah, so this to me, this incident on October the 4th, so where I seem to have kind of got a grip on what this was that I mentioned yesterday based on the relationship between Kerry Thornley and Marina Oswald, which did exist, 100% existed. For a long time, I was puzzled over incidents like this because I was like, well, how the fuck is Oswald there? And he's driving a car and not clean shaven. And when it dawned on me there was a relationship between Marina Oswald and Kerry Thornley, then it fucking all made sense. That Marina was in on the setup of Oswald every single fucking step of the way from the day she got here from the Soviet Union. This individual's conversation was normal, and he indicated that he saw the radio station sign from the highway while proceeding north in his car on Highway 281. He asked concerning the possibility of an announcer's job at Pleasanton, Texas, and appeared interested in applying for work there. He was advised that at the station in Pleasanton, Texas, the station KBOP was operated by a lady whose name was unknown. This individual gave no indication of where he was living, but stated he was unemployed. He left the radio station driving north on Highway 281. Also present during the interview, and also recognized in the photo of Lee Harvey Oswald as identical with the individual, was Robert Jank, a traffic manager for radio station KOBY. So you have multiple people at KOBY identifying Lee Harvey Oswald as having been there, but sure as shit, wasn't Oswald, it was Kerry Thornley. This just goes to the sentiment of how similar those two guys look to each other. God, I'm starting to sound like a broken fucking record. On November 23rd, 1963, confident informant number T1 furnished the following information pertinent to the P.O. Box 30061, New Orleans. Okay, here we go. Change of address, POD form 3575, postmark 92663 at New Orleans, Louisiana, signed Lee H. Oswald. The below right-hand column, designations of which were hand-printed in ink. Postmaster, New Orleans, Louisiana. Name, Oswald Lee H. Effective date, September 24th, 1963. Old address, Post Office Box 30061 in New Orleans. And new address, 2515 West 5th Street, which is the address of Michael Payne and Ruth Payne. Right? Application for Post Office Box, POD 1093 in 2 sections, on each section of which the signature L.H. Oswald appears as signature of applicant. Appearing on this form in longhand are the below right-hand column designations. Name of applicant, Lee Harvey Oswald, delivered to local box address at 657 French, hand-printed in pencil, 657 French Street, New Orleans, 30061. So yes, so what we have here is on November 26th, when Oswald's supposed to be crossing over into motherfucking Mexico, where his visa is stamped September 26th. He's filling out paperwork at the fucking post office in New Orleans, closing out his P.O. box. And so obviously this is the Oswald who goes to jail on November 22nd, right? He's closing out his P.O. box, while on this very same fucking date, William Seymour, Lauren Hall, Lawrence Howard are going to Sylvia Odio's house, and Kerry Thornley is spending a week in motherfucking Mexico City, doing all the shenanigans, coming back on October the 4th, with Marina and the child in whose car? Ruth Payne's station wagon. Ruth Payne's station wagon. How the fuck did the station wagon get there? Did Marina drive? She's not supposed to have ever driven. I have a feeling that bitch knew how to drive. All right, with respect to the above number 2, number T1 stated that with the exception of the signatures and the date of the application, the possibility was that any or all of the handwriting was in the hand of the postal clerk handling the application. Number T1 made inquiry as to, and it was determined that the postal clerk with the initials RT was substitute clerk Richmond Tankersley with his address. I should hope that by now you're seeing how Garrison patterned his files, right? So we're going over a lot of stuff that seems to have nothing to do with Kerry Thornley. It doesn't mention Kerry Thornley, right? But if you know that Kerry Thornley was the one who was in Mexico City and not Oswald, then all of this stuff starts to make sense. You start to realize that Garrison knew it also. And so he arranged his files in such a manner. Like all this stuff has to do with Oswald and going to Mexico City, right? So why is it in the Kerry Thornley file? Because it was motherfucking Kerry Thornley the whole time. God, I wish I could go back in time and talk to Garrison. Captain Wilfred Grussich, Senior Deputy Commander, Traffic Division, New Orleans Police Department, advised that following the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald by the Dallas, Texas Police Department November 22nd, 1963, and showing his picture on television, he recalled that an individual generally fitting the facial characteristics of Oswald had been in the Traffic Division with some Cubans to apply for a permit to parade. Captain Grussich stated he's been handling all applications for parade permits for some time. Before a parade can march in the streets of the city of New Orleans, a permit must be secured. Approval must come through him first before it is approved by the superintendent of police and the mayor of the city of New Orleans. Captain Grussich stated, as best he can recall, sometime in March 1962, 3 individuals came to his office to secure a parade permit. 2 of these persons were, as he remembers, Cuban, who spoke very little English, and the third was an American who acted as the spokesman. As best he can remember, these people represented Cubans in the exile in the United States, and it was their desire to stage a parade for the purpose of raising funds to aid Cubans in Cuba to resist Fidel Castro and his regime. Captain Grussich stated that since this was a controversial sort of situation, he discussed the situation with Superintendent of Police Joseph Guaruso, and it was felt that such a parade could possibly create trouble. So let me pause right here. Anybody familiar with my work should automatically know when I see Oswald accompanied by 2 fucking Cubans. Who do I think it is right off the bat? William Seymour, right? Do I know that Kerry Thornley was associating with Cubans like Louis Rebel and all these fucking guys? Yes, 100%. But I don't know why it's so hard for my fucking brain to break this conditioning of if you see Oswald with 2 Cubans, it's fucking William Seymour, Lauren Hall, and Lawrence Howard, right? But this might not be. Also, this might be in the Kerry Thornley file because this might have been at a time before Garrison put 2 and 2 together on Thornley and William Seymour, right? So he might not have had William Seymour in the mix yet. So yeah, Oswald comes in there with these 2 guys to get a parade permit. Obviously not Oswald. Obviously Garrison thought it was Kerry Thornley. He said he felt it was Oswald he was referring to, and he was there with the Cubans. He said he could not state this to be a fact, but so remember, the facial features reminded him. Remember, so the guy goes in there trying to be associated with certain things, like Cuban, whatever, parade, and then after he is seen on television, the mind automatically connects some dots, and he calls it in and says it was Oswald, right? This happens a fucking 100 times. 100 times. Captain Grussick said that the inquiry through Dennis Lacey, aide to the mayor of City of New Orleans, may reveal further information regarding this parade permit, since all permits must be given final approval by the mayor's office, and Mr. Lacey is the one who would handle this. He further said that the Bureau of Treasury for the City of New Orleans may have some information with respect to this permit. It was pointed out by Captain Grussick that it would be necessary to secure a permit if one to distribute literature in the streets of New Orleans. This would not be within his jurisdiction, but would be in the city permit office, which would be under the Bureau of the Treasury. Captain Grussick said that the incident with respect to the 3 individuals coming to the traffic division to secure a parade permit was during the period of time when John J. Becker was in charge of the traffic division. He's now retired and is residing at 4770 Overton Street, New Orleans. Mrs. John D. Kilgore, 2830 Chapman Street, Shreveport, Louisiana, advised her husband, John D. Kilgore, had left the house that morning, indicating he was going to contact the FBI and tell that he had known Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas, Texas. She stated her husband is out of work and has been out of work ever since he was discharged from his job at the Bilbo Trucking Company in Dallas, Texas, except for a brief period of employment with a trucking company at Shreveport. She stated he stays away from home most of the day and comes in late at night and indicates he is looking for employment. Mrs. Kilgore stated that she had met Lee Harvey Oswald, known to her as Harvey Oswald. Ooh, good one. Interesting. Supportive of the work of John Armstrong. Mrs. Kilgore stated she had met Lee Harvey Oswald, known to her as Harvey Oswald, on one occasion, this being in 1956, when she and her husband lived at 1820 Packard Street, Dallas, Texas. She advised her husband went to work for the Wales Trucking Company, Dallas, where Oswald worked at the time, and that her husband brought Oswald home for dinner on one occasion. There's nowhere in the record that says Oswald ever worked for a trucking company. She stated she never saw Oswald again, but her husband said later that when he worked at Bilbo Trucking Company, Dallas, Oswald came in several weeks to get his paycheck, but did not seem to work there. She stated she recognized the Lee Harvey Oswald shown on television in recent days as the Harvey Oswald she met once in Dallas. God damn it. Now I'm going to have to go back and update a chapter. Fucking hate that shit. Mrs. Kilgore advised her husband had received a head injury while working for the Bilbo Trucking Company at Dallas and had also been hit on the head several times while working in the oil fields. She stated he also suffers from a bad back condition and has difficulty holding employment. She advised that he is rational most of the time, but on occasion appears to have spells when he seems to be out of his mind. She stated she did not think he would intentionally furnish false information, but that he may be angry with Bilbo because Bilbo fired him from his job and reportedly told an employment agency at Austin that Kilgore stayed drunk. She stated that her husband always seemed to feel that when he loses a job, it is because... Oh, then it cuts off. All right. Moving on. Brian Ampolsk, 1418 Herring Road, Metairie, Louisiana, appeared in the New Orleans office November 29, 1963, and furnished following information. He met Lee Harvey Oswald 1 or 2 days before Oswald was arrested, handing out literature on the Fair Play for Cuba Committee on Canal Street in New Orleans. Ampolsk described his conversation with Oswald as one dealing with the situation in Cuba. He said that he and Oswald merely spoke in a general way concerning this situation. He recalled that he did not agree with Oswald's views concerning Cuba and described Oswald as a member of a fanatic fringe. He advised that he considered all members of the Fair Play for Cuba committee as members of the fanatic fringe. While he was conversing with Oswald, he was aware that there were one or two other persons also handing out literature, but he paid no attention to them and does not recall what they looked like. He said that he had not known Oswald before this chance meeting and had no contact with him after this meeting. He advised that he would not have remembered Oswald at all unless the shooting of the president occurred. He said he was not too impressed with Oswald and felt that Oswald was not a sincere Marxist. In his opinion, Oswald only wanted attention, which may have been due to the fact that his father died when he was very young. Ampulse stopped to talk with Oswald while Oswald was passing out literature on Canal Street. He was not introduced to Oswald by anyone. Ampulse said that Oswald was bitter about the U.S. blockade of Cuba in late 1962, and that he agreed with him, but he was not bitter in his attitude as Oswald was. He said he could not recall any more concerning conversation with Oswald, as the whole conversation only lasted about 5 minutes. Ampulse defined fanatic fringe as those persons whose sight of definite goals because of their thinking becomes warped by hatred. Interesting. Why this is in the Kerry Thornley files, not too sure. Perhaps that was on a date that Oswald couldn't have been handing out flyers, and maybe Kerry Thornley handed out flyers in Oswald's stead. All right, 10 pages to go. John J. Becker, 4770 Overton Street, advised that he recalled 2 Cubans and an American coming into the traffic division while he was in charge of the purpose of securing a parade permit. He placed the time of this incident as being in March of 1962. Okay, so what's the fucking problem here? The problem with Oswald going to get a parade permit in March of 1962 is that Oswald was still in the Soviet Union. So, who is this person? We're down to 2 again, right? The 2 people who impersonated Oswald were William Seymour and Kerry Thornley. This being in the Kerry Thornley file, Oswald, or Garrison obviously believed that this was Oswald. I might have a problem with that. Don't know yet. He further stated that he remembered discussing the situation with Captain Wilfred A. Grussich Sr., who was then his deputy in the traffic division. So this is the boss, right? Becker stated he had seen photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald, and although he saw individuals whom applied for the permit, he could not say that one of them had been Oswald. If Becker could not recall if these individuals had actually prepared an application for a permit to parade or had merely come to discuss the possibility of filing an application. He suggested, however, that his secretary at the time, Mrs. Joan Joffrion, who was still secretary to the supervisor of the traffic division, be contacted, as she had handled the paperwork and filing of these permits, and in most instances saw the individuals who were requesting parade permits. Mrs. Gladys Rogers, 4907 Magazine Street, was interviewed in an office in the psychiatric ward of Charity Hospital. Her psychiatrist, Dr. Kyle Ham, was present during the interview. She advised that she remembered Lee Oswald and his wife, who resided in the apartment which was immediately adjacent to her apartment. She said that Lee Oswald worked at a coffee company for several months and then lost his job. During that time he was working, he would leave home at 7 a.m., return about 5 p.m. During the time he was working, he spent the weekends at home with his wife and baby. After he lost his job, occasionally he would leave home about 1 p.m., come back about 5 o'clock in the evening. Occasionally he would change their routine and leave sometime around 10 or 11 a.m. and return about 5 p.m. On these occasions, he was casually dressed, usually wearing a dark pair of trousers and a white sports shirt. She said that Oswald conversed with his wife in a foreign language, which she thought was Russian. He was very mean to his wife and beat her up on several occasions. Oswald was aloof and kept to himself and only had one conversation with her. On this occasion, he inquired as to why she would raise her window and leave it in that position for a short period of time and then close the window. She stated that she told him she was trying to keep the insecticide which he used to spray for ants and other pests from coming into her apartment. In this connection, she stated that frequently she would observe Oswald spraying under the portion of the floors of his apartment. She recalls that Oswald had 2 male visitors who arrived about 3 p.m. one afternoon. One was a tall, slender individual whose name was Bill Stuckey. He conversed with Oswald about a radio program and instructed him to be at 520 South Broad Street at 4:30 p.m. She advised that in the company of Bill Stuckey was Pete Moeller. She heard them mention an individual named Haydel. but she does not recall in what connection his name was mentioned. Mrs. Rogers said that upon one occasion she observed an individual talking to her husband, Eric Rogers, and asked for the location of the Oswald apartment. This was several days before Oswald moved. She described this person as a white male, 5'7" tall, 175 pounds, dark complexion, wearing dark trousers and a white shirt, and had a foreign appearance, possibly Spanish. She recalled that Oswald received a package of books through the mail and said that in his spare time, he always sat on the front porch and read. She recalled an elderly couple visited Oswald on 2 occasions, both during the daytime. Once was on a Saturday, once was on a Sunday. This couple drove up in a green, medium-sized station wagon, and on the last occasion when this couple called, Mrs. Oswald packed all of her clothes and personal effects and went off in the station wagon. Okay, so she's talking about the Paynes, who weren't really old. They were in their fucking 20s at the time. Mrs. Rogers remembered that prior to the time as Oswald left in the station wagon, a young couple in their 20s stopped in to see the Oswalds. Oh, interesting. They arrived in an automobile, but she did not know the make or model of the car. So she sees them leaving in the green station wagon. Older couple. But she also acknowledges the younger couple, which is the Paynes. So two couples were there. That's interesting. Could the older couple be George de Mohrenschildt and his wife? She recalled that after Oswald lost his job, a female who wore a white coat and who was thought by Mrs. Rogers to be a welfare worker called the Oswald apartment. She stated that several days later, Oswald brought home a large bag of groceries, which she assumed he got from either the welfare agency or a relative. Female with a white coat equals a doctor in the notes down at the bottom there. Detective R.D. Lewis, polygraph operator, Dallas, Texas. Police department stated that he ran a polygraph of Buell Wesley Frazier. Okay, so now we got some Buell Wesley Frazier stuff being pulled into the Kerry Thornley files. Fascinating. Detective R.D. Lewis, polygraph operator, Dallas, Texas. Police department stated he ran a polygraph of Buell Wesley Frazier. And while he was running the polygraph, Frazier was shown apparently to be a homemade brown heavy, what appeared to be a homemade brown heavy paper gun case. He stated that Frazier said that it was possible that this was the case, but he did not think that it resembled it. So obviously what we're talking about now is we're talking about, and why this isn't the Kerry Thornley files, again, who knows. Garrison was obviously knew somebody was impersonating Oswald, knew Kerry Thornley was one of those people, obviously didn't put together the pieces yet on William Seymour yet. And here, what we're talking about is Buell Frazier, who allegedly gave Oswald a ride to work, but of course he didn't give Oswald a ride to work that day, right? So that whole story is bullshit. He's trying to ask him, R.D. Lewis is asking him about the brown paper bag that allegedly Oswald brought the rifle in, but the whole story is bullshit, right? None of this shit happened. It's all fiction. So what does he say? Lewis refers to the brown heavy paper gun case. Lewis refers to the paper bag in this manner because of the fact that the Dallas Police Department is of the opinion the brown heavy paper bag was used by Oswald to carry the rifle into the building where he was working. The paper referred to by Lewis is not a gun case at all. Detective Lewis stated that if this was not identical with the sack that was turned over to the Bureau, it is possible that Oswald may have thrown it away. The police have turned over everything that they have in the crime lab to S.A. Drain. This has been stated by Captain George Doherty, head of the crime lab, Lieutenant Carl Day of the crime lab, and R.D. Lewis, polygraph operator in the crime lab. These individuals state that as far as they know, the paper sack of the type described by Frazier was not recovered by the police department. It is possible, but improbable, that it was recovered by the Homicide Bureau. If so, they do not know anything about it in the crime lab of the Dallas Police Department. And here it says, not New Orleans, but interesting as it indicates the Dallas police at this date did not have the brown paper bag, which they later said they recovered from the 6th floor of the school book depository, right? So yeah, they planted some fucking bag in the book depository. Why this is in the Kerry Thornley files, I don't know. Kerry Thornley had nothing to do with the book depository, from what I can tell. But perhaps it's an indication into whether or not Garrison thought that Kerry Thornley was impersonating Oswald at the book depository. Okay, Secret Service report. by Dale Wunderlich. Short, irrelevant paragraph, re Ruth Payne. Received same time from John Rice, special agent in charge of New Orleans. In December 62 or January 63, Elmo Biapel, New Orleans Police Department private, sold tires to a man who called himself A.J. Heidel, and also he owned an electrical contracting shop called A.J. Electrical. Interesting. The tires were bought for a 56 or 57 Ford station wagon lighting color. Tires were charged to electrical company and had bad address was given. Address was checked out and no one had heard of Heidel. When the tires were purchased, Heidel signed a charge receipt. Aha, so here we go. This is in December 62 or January 63. This is in the Kerry Thornley file, and thus Garrison believed that this was Kerry Thornley, right? Here it goes again into J. Philip Stein and the call from Jack Martin. I don't really want to go back into that. More stuff on Herman Coleman, the district attorney. And this gets into the David Ferry interview, which we're not going to get into today because Ferry deserves a couple weeks to himself. So I believe we are going to wrap this up for the day. Man, I'll tell you, these Lee Harvey Oswald internal security Cuba documents are fucking fantastic. Fucking fantastic. This goes into the Marty Abelow stuff that we already talked about. So Commission Document 1033, unpublished, consists of only this one page. Fascinating. Abelow was the guy who talked to Lee Harvey Oswald when he was out on the street. Possibly this is in the Kerry Thornley files because Garrison believed that this person could probably identify Kerry Thornley as the person he spoke to. This goes into Thomas Compton. Thomas Compton, this is some good stuff. We're not going to cover this today. Way too much time needs to be spent on Thomas Compton. This does go into Compton's background with David Ferry. Yeah, Compton's a fucking liar. But we will get to him. Compton talks about the New Orleans Astronomy Club and Mr. Wolf. Yep. And that is it. That's going to do it for today. Let me check and see if any questions have come in. Nope. Looking good. All right. So to the 6 viewers currently watching on Kick.com, if you haven't created an account and followed me, please do so. I need to get to 75 followers on Kick in order to monetize. So please help me get there. All right, so that's going to do it for today. And tune in tomorrow where, I think tomorrow we will start to get into the Weisberg False Oswald files, which is all directly connected to Kerry Thornley. So thanks for tuning in. Go buy my book if you haven't. Buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook. And that's about it for today, guys. Thanks a lot.